Hey everyone, I've been meaning to do this for a while, but um, this is gonna be my video take on the whole, Microsoft changing their DRM policies for the Xbox One, removing all of it. I'm still not entirely convinced to buy the new Xbox One. I mean, granted, I don't really like the Xbox. I'm not a fanboy. I just, I don't know. From Microsoft, they've never come off to me as actually caring about the community. Versus Sony and Nintendo, but and even though those are their giant, conglomerates of their own, they at least do things that are in the consumer's best interest, the gamer's best interest. So even if it's just for good PR, they stand by it and it works out. Um, I mean, just look at the PS3. It had a rough start, and then now it's at the point to where I think it's sold more than the Xbox 360 by now. um, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm just guessing because I mean, I keep hearing that a lot lately though. So now it doesn't need to be online 24/7. It just needs the internet connection for the first setup. I guess for the patch to remove all the DRM policies, which removing that was still a bad thing. Like I mean, yeah, we should be happy that they're not going through with it. But since they were so adamant about keeping that in there, what makes this a bad thing is if they can just remove all that with a patch, imagine how easy it is to slip it back in with another patch. Or a few patches down the line. So, that's what has me not so convinced that they're in their marketing strategy right now. You know, the Kinect, as far as we know, we still need the Kinect. Mostly because the user interface revolves heavily around the Kinect, and that thing that is always plugged in. Like it's still a requirement as far as we know. Um, and I don't want something like that in my room where it might be watching me. I mean, I have a camera, yes. I mean, for PlayStation 3, I have the PlayStation iCam, but even oh, I have it. Like, see, there's the cam, there's my system. I have it unplugged right now. I plug it in when I use it, but I unplug it when I'm done because why should I have it plugged in if I'm not using it? And I value my privacy. I don't want no one being able to look at me. Um, and I know I'm not the only one with this concern. I mean, there's plenty of people out there with the concern. And even if you're an Xbox fan, you should not be sitting there going, "Oh, digital media is the way of the future," because as much of the way of the future as that is, we're not there yet. We don't have the infrastructure to support that on a daily basis. I mean, if a hurricane was to hit my area and internet goes out but not so much power, we'd we'd have power so I can still game. But if the system would have had its internet requirement, I would not be able to game. Um, so, but that's just one example, And some areas, there's some rural areas, or even some just people that can't afford it. Like my best friend growing up, I know her family's struggling. You know, she likes to game from time to time. Her sister, her 15-year-old sister, loves video games. So imagine having to get the internet just to be able to play games, and she plays games like Sonic, Mario, single player games that or games that they're usually single player, so they shouldn't have to require an internet connection. Um, what else was I gonna say? Sorry about that. All this talking about it, just like for me, I got lost in thought there. Um, but as I was saying, yeah, my friend and her sister, she loves games, but she plays a lot of the single player type of games. There's very few games that she would, as far as I know right now, only 2 games that she has where she can play online multiplayer. And that's Tekken Tag Tournament 2 and Resident Evil 6. So, yeah, there's that to consider. What else? As far as we know, aside from that, you know, there's the whole issue with the third-party developers slash publishers. How a lot of them can't self-publish unless they're a triple A title maker like Capcom, Namco, EA, Square Enix. Um, and that's drawing developers away from the system because, as far as we know, those regulations have not changed. So Microsoft was not only, as far as we know, they weren't only being anti-consumer because now that they removed that, it's not so much anti-consumer. They're being anti-developer. So, and that's where Sony, I think, still has an advantage because yes, they have all the indie developers. Now there's people out that are out there saying, I don't care for indie games and I don't care for all these retro style, all these indie retro style games. That's not all indie games are. Indie is just a term for independent developers. And let's be real here. You know, all these AAA developers, they were all indie developers at one point. Capcom, they were an indie developer at one point. They got famous for Street Fighter and Mega Man, which came out pretty much around the same exact time. What else did they get famous for? Namco, they were famous for Pac-Man and a few other successful games like Galaga or Dig Dug, little arcade games. They were indie developers. That's how a lot of these companies started out. The Mortal Kombat team, NetherRealm Studios, they were a part of Midway. They started out as indie developers. Sony was already into making hardware, but as video games developers, when they launched the first PlayStation, they were indie developers. Nintendo, they were basically indie developers until they became big due to the success of Mario, which was very early on. So that's something to consider, that while a lot of the games we have today look great, these developers didn't get there by just automatically making one game and boom, they're there. They worked at it. A lot of them have been working at it for years, and one of them, and it takes the support from people that just like the game, because you start small and then you work your way up. So a lot of the indie developers today, if they get more and more support, they won't be indie developers anymore. They'll be AAA developers at some point in the future. So it's just crazy to think that people have this mentality that indie developers are just little developers that make retro style games. That's not all true. Some games, though indie developed, have some very good looks to them. Even if the games themselves weren't good, sometimes they look high end in terms of graphics. One example of this that came to mind just now was a game called Amy that you can buy on the PlayStation Network store. The game itself is not so good, but graphically, it looks almost like any full retail game that you'd find on a store shelf. So that's just one example that I'd like to point out. But as far as we know, with the Xbox One, if you don't have internet, you can't get the update to remove their DRM policies. Not only that, they're trying to give everyone the guilt trip over at Microsoft for their family sharing plan. The whole Xbox family sharing plan that they had going on, which they can still implement because it applies to digital downloads. It can apply to digital downloads. They don't need it to apply to the physical game because the system they were trying to sell everyone on was basically an all digital system. Even with physical copies, which was just like a slap in the face because it might as well have been digital. That's how it was going to work. And not only that, no one should have to be forced to have an internet connection to play a game that's one player. Let me pull some games out of my shelf to show you what I mean. A game like this, if you played it, or whether you played it or not, this game is a single player game. There's no multiplayer modes, nothing. I should not have to sign on to be able to play this game. This game has a multiplayer portion, but that does require internet, so if I can't play that without internet, fine, I understand. But the main game is single player. I shouldn't have to be forced online just to play that part of the game. This game, it's an RPG. It's single player. I shouldn't have to be forced online to play it. Same goes for, of course, Final Fantasy 13. And this game, which this is a Japanese release, but this will be coming to North America. It's a music rhythm game, by the way. Even this one, like, yes, they have DLC and stuff, but in terms of features, it's a dancing game, so this definitely shouldn't be forced to have you online. This game is also a single player game. It has a multiplayer mode, but as far as the game goes, that multiplayer mode also has a single player mode on it. So this game should not be forced online aside from the co-op play. Even though this game isn't the greatest, it's more of an arcade fighting 2D game, so you can play multiplayer locally. You should not have to be forced on to play this game at all. Unless you're playing online multiplayer, of course. So, that's just some things I wanted to point out. Like, show you a few examples of games that, they all have a single player focus, and you shouldn't have to be forced online for a single player game. I don't care if internet is the way of the future and everything, digital media. Being forced to have an internet connection just to play a game that's one player, that's something dumb. And there's games out there that have done it before, and people hate on it all the time. People complain about it, and then the company loses support for the particular game, product, whatever, and the series ends right there for that. Like, that's done. So it should be a proven fact already. Anyway, I'm gonna end the video here. Comment, talk about this, whatever, and make informed decisions. Don't just blindly go to the Xbox, even if you're a fan, because think about it. As a gamer, if you want to game, what is the Xbox really offering you aside from Halo and the Kinect? and Killer Instinct. Think about that. Don't think about that they removed the DRM because they can easily just put that back in there. You know? So I'm just saying, think about it. Don't blindly follow, like, because I'll tell you one thing: if Sony or Nintendo was to do something like that, I would stick with what I have now and stop buying their products immediately. I would just use whatever I have left. Um, but that's all I wanted to say. I hope everyone has a nice day and take care, y'all.